Hello, everyone. Welcome. Good morning. We're going to get started in just a minute. Hi, everyone. Good morning. We're going to get started in just a minute. Thank you so much for joining us. Okay, welcome, everyone. Okay, it seems like the stream of people is starting to slow down, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining us this morning. My name is Rebecca Herst. I'm Associate Director for Resilience at the Boston Green Ribbon Commission. And I'm really excited to be hosting this webinar this morning, where we're going to be sharing a little bit about what is happening on coastal resilience from our colleagues at the City of Boston, City of Cambridge, and DCR. So this morning we are joined by Chris Osgood, Director of the Office of Climate Resilience, and Mayor Michelle Wu's Senior Advisor for Infrastructure. Julie Wormser, Chief Climate Officer for the City of Cambridge, and Mike Galvin, Project Manager at Massachusetts Department of Conservation and Recreation. Later on, we will also be joined by Sarah White, Director of Climate Resilience at DCR, and Rob Lowell, Civil Engineer at DCR, who will be able to join us for the Q&A section of the webinar. So again, welcome, and we're going to just go ahead and get started. I will hand it over to you, Chris.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. Good morning, all. I'm going to bring up some slides in just one quick sec. All right, so really, Rebecca, Azanta, thank you so much for your leadership and your partnership and collaboration on this work. And thank you to Mike and Julie, whose presentations I look forward to and whose collaboration around resilience has been absolutely terrific. And thank you to every single one of you. Your focus on resilience for our city and for our region really makes a world of difference. Again, I'm Chris Osgood. I have the great pleasure of leading Mayor Wu's Office of Climate Resilience here in the city of Boston. We are, as folks may know, a relatively new office. We were started last year, but the work around resilience here in Boston is not new. We have been working with so many of you for years, for a decade, on thinking about the climate risks that are in front of us and how, as a city and as a region, we should work to reduce those risks, to protect our residents, and to help preserve our communities. That decade of planning is now moving into a decade of implementation, which is really the focus of our office, looking at things like extreme heat, increased precipitation, as well as coastal flooding, which is really the focus of the briefing this morning. I'm also very excited to announce two new members of the office who are joining us on this session. One is our new Deputy Director of the Office of Climate Resilience, Nayeli Rodriguez, who has been leading a lot of the resilience-related work here in the city for a number of years, and is joining the office to sort of really help drive the pace of our implementation forward in collaboration with so many of our partners across city government and across the region. And the other person is Kate Rusa. Kate is new to the city, but not new to this work, and is joining to lead a specific element of this, which is our focus with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, which I'll be talking a little bit more about in a few minutes.
Chris,
so over the next, oh, go ahead.
We can't see your slides if you have started to share them.
Thank you so much for that note. Rebecca, how's it look now?
Perfect.
Awesome. All right, folks missed 0 of the slides. I'm just going to sort of, in the next 10 minutes, do 3 quick things. First is just to provide a bit of context that all of you are very familiar with. Second, to talk about Boston's approach to resilience-related work, particularly around coastal flooding. And then third, really dive into some of the projects and what collaboration looks like. So first on the context, and again, this is information which is, I know, familiar to so many of you. Boston, of course, is a coastal city. 1/6 of our city is built on fill, and in places across the city of Boston, places like Long Wharf, among others, we are experiencing sunny day flooding here. That risk becomes even greater over the course of this century. We are looking at about 40 inches of sea level rise between the start of this century and the 2070s, which makes those flood paths that exist in our city today all the more significant and all the more imperative that we as a city and we as a broad region address this risk. Addressing that risk has been the focus of the plans that have necessarily worked with so many of you because our coastline itself is something which is owned by, managed by, and envisioned by all of our stakeholders across the city. Our 47 miles of coastline here in the city of Boston is owned by the city at about 16% of the actual shoreline, by the state at about 50% of Boston's shoreline, by a number of private property owners at about 30%, and by the federal government at additional 4%. And as we are sort of collectively doing this work to reduce the risk of coastal flooding, we are very focused, not just on walling ourselves off from the community, which is what we do not want to do. We want to reduce that risk, but really think about how we continue to enhance public access to that shoreline, how we make sure that this wonderful shared asset of our harbor is something that we can continue to bring people even closer to as we reduce the risk of coastal flooding in the future. And that as we build along that coastline, we are not just enhancing public access, but we are also making sure that we're continuing to invest in the ecology of the harbor itself. And it's that triple bottom line around reducing resilience, improving public access, and increasing or improving the ecology of Boston, which is really the focus of our work. That work is really done with 3 different strategies that are happening at the same time, but have different timelines associated with them. The first is really focused on today's storms. We want to make sure that we as a city are protecting and supporting our residents around preparedness for all hazards, including around coastal flooding. This is work which is really being led by our Office of Emergency Management. We last year hired a new chief of the Office of Emergency Management, Adrian Jordan, really with an expanded focus, a focus which was much more focused on the climate hazards in front of us. This past September, with credit to Nayeli and the Office of Emergency Management, we ran what we believe was a first in the nation Deployables Day, a one-day training event for the folks who have deployable flood walls to put them up in advance of the winter season, which is when we typically have seen our most extreme coastal flooding events here in Boston. We are now looking at other interim flood measures in our city as we do some of the longer term changes to our coastline. And the Office of Emergency Management will be updating its hazard mitigation plan, natural hazard mitigation plan, over the course of this year. And there'll be a number of public conversations about that, and we encourage you to get involved in that process. Most of what I'm going to be talking about, though, in the next couple of slides really focuses on the sort of second and third strategies that you see on this screen. And these are the strategies that are focused on the transformation of Boston's shoreline to lower longer-term flood risk here in our city. The first set of work is really focused on sort of the places where we are experiencing flooding today, where we would expect to see significant flooding later in this decade or early in the 2030s. This is a place where the mayor has invested more of the city's capital budget than at any other time in Boston's history in work to be able to enhance that coastline and be able to protect Boston residents. And I'll go through some of what those projects are. And then the third set of work, which you see on the screen, is a set of work really looking at some of the longer term investments that need to be made in Boston to lower flood risk over the course of this century. A lot of work which is we plan on doing in collaboration with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, who bring a tremendous amount of expertise and experience and capacity to be able to do this work here for our city. And I'll talk a little bit more about what engagement will look like around that over the course of this year. So to dive quickly into some of the projects. These are projects, again, that are focused on the more urgent places around coastal flooding here in Boston, places that are experiencing flooding today. And many of these, as you will see, are being done in collaboration with our partners in the state, or private developers, ways that we can make sure that together we are addressing this flood risk. You'll also note that a number of these include an aspect of federal funding. And clearly some of the news out of this week, I think, have raised some questions about federal funding, questions that'll take us a little bit of time to answer, but without question, these remain the places that, as a city, we are very focused on being able to deliver increased protection for all of you, and are looking to find ways to be able to move each of these projects forward. So to walk from south to north up Boston's coastline, wanted to sort of briefly highlight Tinian Beach, a collaboration with our terrific partners, the Department of Conservation and Recreation. This is a beautiful park which experiences flooding today. We were very fortunate to be able to receive a state grant to help move the design forward as a city, and then work in collaboration with DCR on a federal grant to be able to do some of the long-term construction in this corridor. The next project is Morrissey Boulevard, a project that I'm sure, or an area that I'm sure that is familiar to many of you. It is a roadway that experiences flooding at great regularity here in our Commonwealth and in our city. The city of Boston, in collaboration with MassDOT and DCR, have been leading over the course of this last year a design study for Morrissey Boulevard that looks at both mobility issues across or along the corridor, as well as coastal flooding issues. We expect next month to be wrapping up that study with a conceptual design that addresses some of the flood risks, and then are looking at paths forward to be able to fund that to go from design into construction. McConnell Park in Dorchester is a project that our City Parks Department was able to recently complete, being able to sort of address a flood path that impacts the Savin Hill community by providing an elevated berm and seating area, essentially slightly beyond the outfield of the ball fields in that area. Moving up to South Boston, in collaboration, again, with our partners at the Department of Conservation and Recreation, with the MWRA, and with Dorchester Bay City, our Parks Department is leading a pair of projects focused around Moakley Park. Moakley Park in Carson Beach is one of the most significant long-term flood paths in the city of Boston. We were fortunate to celebrate earlier this month the receipt of funding that will allow us to take the Moakley Park project into further design, so that we can enhance the design that is currently in front of us, and be able to tie that into some adjacent projects, really ensuring a level of protection for the adjacent residents in the Mariel, McCormick, and Ann Litchfield Colony homes, as well as some of the key critical transportation infrastructure in this area, like the Red Line, like the Morrissey Boulevard corridor. In addition to that, the city, as folks may know, have been advancing a set of work along the Fort Point Channel to help address one of the nearer term flood paths in that corridor, a project that we expect to fund through a combination of $10 million of city capital funding and an expected grant from the federal government to be able to move that forward. Hand in hand with that, we've been doing work in the Flynn Marine Park. The Flynn Marine Park is the city of Boston, Boston's sort of principal marine industrial park. Here we are similarly doing a design project that folks can get engaged in and learn more about to protect the near-term flood risks and long-term flood risks in this area, with a slightly different set of designs than what we are exploring in other places across Boston's coastline. Here, the focus is both on resilience, but also on ensuring that those marine industrial businesses can continue to be have great ship-to-shore transfer and a set of design solutions that really support their work going forward. And then the last project to highlight in the South Boston area is obviously one which is completed, and that is Martin's Park, a beautiful playground adjacent to the Children's Museum, where within that playground, there's elevated landscaping that provides not just an interesting topography for the play features, but provides a degree of resilience for the Fort Point neighborhood around it. Hopping up to downtown in the North End, the city has been leading a collaboration focused on Long Wharf. And Long Wharf, as many of you know, is a place that experiences a significant amount of sunny day flooding, looking at how we can address some of the near-term flood risks there. And then in collaboration with a project in the North End and a project in the Wharf District, look at how we address the longer-term flood risks that would really impact significant portions of downtown Boston. Another project to sort of flag in this area is Langone Popolo Playground in the North End. This is a recently completed project by our Parks Department. That image that you see in the is of the sort of terraced bench seating in the North End, and I think it's a great example of a way in which we're trying to both increase resilience and improve the quality of Boston's shoreline. That terrace seating is sort of a beautiful place to sit on any sort of sunny day, and it also serves in particular stormy days as the flood resilience protection for the North End neighborhood. Mike and Sarah and Rob will talk a little bit more about the project, which is just around the corner from that, which is around the New Charles River Dam, a really critical project for the city, for the Commonwealth, and for every stakeholder across this region. Moving quickly to Charlestown, the city of Boston is shortly kicking off through its planning department an advanced study around the Charlestown Navy Yard. This is the area that is adjacent to the National Park Service site, where we are working with the property owners there and along the Little Mystic Channel to think about what both district scale solutions might look like, solutions that will help reduce the likelihood of inland flooding in the city of Boston, as well as guidance around retrofits to some buildings where that may be appropriate. And then the second project that is focused here is a project that broke ground in December. It's a $25 million reconstruction of Ryan Playground, a beautiful playground at the northern end of Charlestown, which is one of two parcels that the city needs to do work in to close a significant flood path that would, left unaddressed, would allow for flooding into the Sullivan Square area and into parts of Somerville and into Cambridge. So this project we've been very excited to be able to move forward with support through the city's budget. And then just to close out our sort of quick run through some of the ongoing work that the city is doing in East Boston with credit to Massport. Pierce Park 2 was recently completed, providing a degree of elevation in connection with Pierce Park 1 that helps address some of the near-term flood risks and long-term flood risks there. The city also earlier in January did receive funding to be able to move forward the second project you see on the screen here, Lewis Mall, Carlton Wharf. This is a very critical flood path in East Boston. It is a flood path where, similar to Long Wharf, experiences some routine flooding today. Lewis Street, in fact, is the first street in the city that we have posted for no parking in advance of significant potential flooding events because of the levels of inundation that we've seen in past storms in that area. It's also a street that gets regularly closed during the course of those storms, and is an important one for us to be able to move forward. And we are fortunate to have the design funding or the funding in hand to take those designs to 100%. Similarly, we're doing work with credit to another member of the team, Kat McCandless, on a project along Border Street in East Boston, a flood path which similarly impacts not only sections of residential East Boston and the Central Square area, but also impacts some very critical regional transportation infrastructure, including some of MassDOT's tunnels and key community assets like the principal supermarket for the East Boston community. The third project is one at Bennington Street and Fredericks Park, a project in collaboration that we're doing in collaboration with Revere. And I think what I wanted to sort of briefly touch on is sort of across those last three projects, you get a little bit of a sense of the more of the nature of these projects, and to some degree the complexity with each of them. So looking at Bennington Street and at Border Street and at Lewis Street and Carlton Wharf, just to sort of call out that they are three projects all in East Boston, all protecting very, very critical residential, commercial, and infrastructure assets. But they need to be done in slightly different ways. So the project at Bennington Street and Fredericks Park is a project whose flood path cuts across both Boston and Revere. So this is a project that is being done in coordination between those two cities with the support of a pair of municipal vulnerability program grants from the Commonwealth. Border Street is a project which is being done across 7 private property owners, where the city of Boston essentially is stepping in and leading a coordinated planning effort across those property owners, even though there is not public land in this area, to make sure that together we are designing and implementing a resilience strategy that protects not only those properties, but all the properties that are behind them from the flood risk that is in front of us. And Lewis Street and Carlton Wharf is a project that is being done essentially in collaboration between the city of Boston and Massport. 3 projects, 3 different sort of partnerships that are necessary to move them forward. The context for these projects are also very different. The Bennington Street project is right adjacent to DCR's Belle Isle Marsh, one of the beautiful salt marshes in Greater Boston Harbor. The Border Street project is happening within a designated port area, and Lewis Street Lewis Mall and Carlton Wharf is a project that is really focused on the existing harbor walk. And consequently, for that project, we were looking at elevating that harbor walk along Border Street. We were looking at, as a first step, seawall repair and elevation, whereas along Bennington Street, we were looking at a different type of intervention with raising a road. So whether it's raising a road, repairing a seawall, or elevating a harbor walk, each of these projects here and across our waterfront really are requiring different sorts of solutions, just given the context and given the needs of each of the neighborhoods. And then the financing for each of these projects is also quite different. Bennington Street and Fredericks Park is one that has been advanced through state grants, Border Street through city funding, Lewis Mall and Carlton Wharf, a combination of funding, but most recently with the federal grant that we've received. So wanted to give a sense of this sort of complexity because it sort of speaks to the nature of the collaboration that is already happening and the nature of the collaboration that's going to be necessary to make all of this work move forward here in Boston, across the Commonwealth. Before turning it over to Rebecca and then over to Mike and to Julie, just wanted to briefly touch on one last thing, which is the U.S. Army Corps process that is in front of us. The U.S. Army Corps, again, is one of the most significant federal partners that we have in being able to address some of the long-term flood risks that Boston experiences. The way in which you sort of formally partner with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is through a coastal storm risk management study. That study culminates in the spring of 2028 with a report that is submitted to Congress. And in that report are a set of recommended design interventions, recommended capital projects to lower the flood risk for our city. Those projects, the sort of the first versions of those projects, are going to be publicly presented over the course of this year. And so in thinking about ways in which this broader group can stay engaged in this process, staying engaged, particularly in this Army Corps work, as well as each of the projects that I highlighted before, is a really important next step. And so to be able to plug into the work along the Army Corps, to be able to plug into our nearer term capital projects, I encourage people to go visit boston.gov/climate resilience. I can put that information in the chat. You can find out more about each of these projects, find out more about how to get engaged. We know that we're going to be able to address the risk that's in front of us through the collaboration that is present on this call, whether it is around getting the designs right, whether it is thinking about how to do the financing, whether it is to think about how to make sure that we are not just designing great projects, but building and maintaining them for the success of our city and our region for generations to come. So look forward to your questions, look forward to the additional presentations, and thank you so much for everybody's focus on this really critical effort.
Great. Thanks so much, Chris. We are now going to hand it over to Julie. Thank you so much. Julie, take it away.
Thanks, Rebecca. I think you're seeing the backside of my slides, right?
Not yet.
We're not seeing anything yet.
Let's see. Are you seeing them now?
No.
Oh my gosh. Oh, because I'm not sharing my screen. You would think by now.
No problem.
Okay. All right. Let's see. How about that?
We can see them, but they're not in presenter mode.
How about that? Now are you seeing?
Now
All right.
we're seeing presenter mode.
Non-presenting. Yeah. How about that? Am I seeing them the right way?
Beautiful.
All right. All right. It's only been a few short years since the beginning of COVID. Still don't have the hang of it. So thank you very, very much for having me on this panel. It is an honor to be here. And I really loved Chris's presentation, and I wanted to say a couple of things about that before I shift upstream and talk about the coastal flooding risks above the two dams. It was really only 12 years ago when Superstorm Sandy hit New York and barely missed Boston because we had the biggest part of the storm surge at low tide instead of high tide. And at that time, we were just focusing on getting off fossil fuels and trying to prevent the worst of climate change. And so to think about how far we've come in 12 years in New England's capital city is pretty amazing. And the things that we have collectively learned over time together in collaboration across sector throughout this time is really extraordinary. We learned that neighborhood level coastal resilience is the most effective level of intervention. Unfortunately, we also realized that there's no governance structure at the neighborhood level. So that makes it more challenging in terms of regulations and funding and planning. We learned that people really want to stay close to a cleaned up Boston Harbor. And so you look at all of the interventions that Chris was talking about, and the vast majority are wonderful waterfront parks that protect inland while facing the ocean. We also just are incredibly lucky that we have very good modeling done by Woods Hole Group, and now the entire coastline of Massachusetts has that, because we haven't been hit by the big one, and disasters really do sharpen your attention. And it is groups like the Green Ribbon Commission and the City of Boston and the many nonprofits as well and private sector that helped us understand what our risks are without actually having experienced them directly. So we are collectively way ahead of the curve in terms of trying to prevent flood damage, not just clean it up. I would also say in both of our presentations, and Mike's as well, this emphasis on 2070, which was really kind of 50 years away when we started doing this work together and doing modeling in earnest. And it begs the question, what comes after that? And I would say that one is the Massachusetts coast is extraordinarily flat. As Chris mentioned, a lot of this was built on salt marshes. Our ancestors used horses and shovels, and it was a lot of dirt and a lot of work, and they didn't do any higher. They didn't build any higher than they knew they needed, but they never contemplated sea level rise. So there's going to come a time where it's still feasible to elevate our shoreline engineering wise, but not financially. And so I see this next now 45 years as our opportunity to, shore up our existing infrastructure as much as possible, but use that time to plan for what's next. Because those costs for protecting more and more and more of the coastline will just increase asymptotically. So again, thank you to Rebecca for having us and for Chris and Mike for their thoughts as well. So I want to say that as scary as Chris's flood map was, it actually only was mostly focused on the city of Boston, and it continues inland. And one of the challenges is beyond Boston, the cities are, 2 square miles, 6 square miles, very, very fragmented. So we are doing similar work to what Boston is doing, but across 10 cities. And just as we have no neighborhood governance structure, we have no county system that can regulate, fund, bond. And so this has been through an entirely volunteer effort among municipalities and DCR. So one of the challenges, and the gray you see is just an elevation map in Cambridge. And Cambridge was the city to first realize the risks upstream. So our clever ancestors built dams in the Mystic and Charles River. These were estuaries. The Charles River tidal flood went all the way up to Watertown. In the Mystic, it went all the way up to North Cambridge and Fresh Pond. And a little over 100 years ago, the Charles River Dam was created because the mud flats at low tide were so smelly that they wanted to keep it at mid tide. And then the Mystic Dam was built in the 60s. So apparently the Medford Boat Club could always make it out, not just at high tide. Those dams have caused such design challenges because upstream we sort of forgot that that water is managed at mid tide. And so we have created tremendous flood challenges for ourselves when those dams ultimately are overtopped. So they protect us now, but we're getting closer and closer and closer. So we've had a couple pretty major storms that came within a couple feet of the top of the dam. And by mid-century, both dams are expected to flank, the water go around the dam, and also go over the top. I'm going to leave it entirely to Mike to talk about what they're doing on the dam. But it's just to say we're getting kind of to chin level in terms of those dams protecting upstream from saltwater flooding. And as you can see, that lower level is mid-tide, and that's what DCR manages the rivers at. So this is the probability of flooding. It's not depth. The color is basically how often will you get flooded if we do nothing. And this is where you can see that we would expect the dams to be overtopped without intervention. So the gray area, which unfortunately is where a lot of our regional critical infrastructure is, whether it's the airport or sewage treatment or food distribution or energy or telecommunications, that we can expect to inundate within, every year and a half. And saltwater flooding is so corrosive that it's not something you want to have as a constant. And then above the dam, we would expect the dams to overtop at least every couple of years, and upstream enough for every 5 to 20 years. So again, saltwater flooding, not something you want over time, especially when you're not a salt marsh. So 7 years ago, I was one of the folks who reached out to 50 thought leaders in the Mystic River watershed and said, help us understand what your biggest climate challenges are. And folks over and over said, we're really, really worried about the impact of the Amelia Earhart Dam on the Mystic River, either in intense rain not being able to get downstream, or coastal flooding not getting upstream. And so all 21 communities in that watershed reached out to DCR and then Governor Baker and said, we're worried about the dam. The first thought was the pump, but beyond that, it turns out that the more important thing was to actually elevate the dam. So soon after that letter, this 21 community, it's actually 20 community group got together with DCR and the engineers working on both the dam itself and concerns about upstream and downstream flooding, and looked at all of this purple is the amount of saltwater flooding all the way into Cambridge's Fresh Pond, all the way up to the Watertown Dam, all the way up, into Malden, etc. This is what we expect to happen with 5 more feet of ocean between sea level rise and increased storms. We've been working together since 2019 to understand what the best interventions are and how much of that flooding we can manage. And so as Chris has been talking about the Boston waterfront, this has really been the flooding associated with the dams. And what we realized is that with essentially 9 interventions, some of those are the same that Chris mentioned, all of that purple actually, where it turned to green, that would be high and dry during a 1 in 100 chance storm in 2070, which is again about 5 feet higher as a projection from our 1 in 100 storm today. So that was, again, modeling done predominantly through DCR and Cambridge on behalf of all the upstream communities. And so this first modeling said, okay, here's this, Sharpie equivalent of modeling to say, where could we cut off flood pathways? What is needed? And so there are multiple flood pathways in the Mystic watershed. All but 2 of them, and the most important ones, are publicly owned. And we're really far along in progress to date. So again, skipping the dam, but we've gotten a lot of funding for it. Draw 7 Park is right next to the dam. That is fully funded and permitted with construction underway. The Island End River, we are worried about our FEMA grant, but has had initial approval. That's the largest grant ever under the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities program in all of New England. So we're hoping that is still coming. And then there are 2 private redevelopments where they are aware of the concern. 425 Medford, it's elevating the shoreline in a beautiful way that keeps access to the river. That's part of their design. And the bus depot and the casino, they know the issue. They haven't started on that concern yet, but all underway. In the Charles River, it's really the Charles River Dam and surrounding areas. And as Chris mentioned, those are already starting to be elevated. So the dam is under Army Corps study, and the rest of the parks are going to, the waterfront parks, Boston and DCR, and will be part of community engagement. We're not ready to rebuild parks or seek funding for them, but we do have some funding available for community engagement in terms of what people want to see happen when the shoreline is elevated. Beyond the progress we've made on a site basis, we were able to get $1 million through a congressional earmark. And what we're doing now is doing a regional engineering study to go from that Sharpie marker of where the flood pathways are to really understanding at a ground level, what will it take? How expensive will it be? What opportunities are there for co-benefits for all of the pieces that are required to elevate the shoreline to protect inland neighborhoods for 5 more feet of sea level rise. And so Weston and Sampson is finishing up that work, but this is what that kind of report looks like, where you say, I'm just going to zoom in. I don't know if I can zoom in. Can you guys see that? Yes, no?
Yep.
So, so when you're looking at this saying, okay, here's the existing elevation. This is what the project is designed to do. This is what we project as very fine point, not broad brushstroke, but site specific based on wind and waves, etc. This is what we expect in terms of flooding. So there's no gap. You guys are good to go. And so there's some situations where we say, actually, what you're proposing to do is a little short of what we think you'll get for flooding. So if you're still in early design, you might want to either have another strategy or elevate what you're doing. So I think that is it for me. But this has been an extraordinary effort, both in terms of the multiple municipalities, multiple nonprofits, multiple engineering firms, and the state and the federal government. Because again, multiple communities and a very long-term project that, including the dams, is probably $500 million total once we are good to go. But very exciting and many, many people to thank. So I will stop there and give it to Mike and Rebecca.
Great. Thank you so much, Julie. This is all, there's so much information here. Really, really appreciate our panelists. We'll hand it over to you, Mike. And just a reminder, if people have questions, I know a number of people have put them into the chat. Please continue to do that, and we'll get to them after Mike speaks. Take it away, Mike.
All right, thank you. Just make sure. Can you see my slide?
Yes.
All right. Thank you for inviting me. And I want to first say that my name is Mike Galvin. I'm the project manager for the improvements to Amelia Earhart Dam and the New Charles River Dam. Yeah, while these two dams aren't my only responsibilities lately, they have taken over the lion's share of what I'm doing. Of course, I could not do it without the help of other people at DCR. I especially want to say the director of flood control and his assistant, Bill Goda, and his assistant, Theo Bienami, have been invaluable. I mean, their knowledge, they're a great asset to DCR, and the projects would not be where they are without them. I also, as you can see, these slides I actually took from an update earlier that was put together with the help of AECOM. AECOM, if there's anything wrong on these slides, it's my fault, not AECOM's. I did some modifications. So, slide. Okay. So as Julie mentioned, DCR has been in partnership with the Mystic River Water Association and the City of Cambridge and the other citizen towns. And in 2008, we really came together. We realized there's a problem, especially at both the Amelia Earhart Dam and the New Charles River Dam. We had already started studying it, but we came to realize that there's a lot of information out there and a lot of different consultants working at, and they weren't working together. So we brought everyone together, and we have been meeting since then, almost quarterly, to go over updates to models, to go over new projects, and it has been invaluable as we're putting these projects forward and moving them into construction. We're able to make changes in design and not have problems come back afterwards. And we went through, we analyzed all the modeling that was going on. We've looked at updates to the studies, so we could modify on the fly. And the other partner that DCR has had, as with the New Charles River Dam, is the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. The New Charles River Dam is different from the Amelia Earhart Dam. The Amelia Earhart Dam is wholly owned by the DCR in the state of Massachusetts. The New Charles River Dam was built as a federal project in the 70s, and thus any modifications to the Charles River Dam has to go through the Corps. And so we're in the middle of that process with them. So taking a step back, the role of these two dams, the Amelia Earhart Dam was built in the 60s. The New Charles River Dam was built in the 70s. The role of them was to keep the harbor out of the basin, and then to maintain the basins within a very tight 2-foot range. And it does that through its gravity drainage and pumping capacity. There's locks that we use both to move boats up and down, and also to release water through gravity. Now, as Julie mentioned, we really had been focusing on what they call the 1% storm of 2070. So you have sea level rise, which is obviously making our job a lot harder to maintain that basin level, and will make it much harder once we get overtopped. And usually with a coastal storm, you design a project to withstand a 1% storm, a storm that has a 1% chance of happening in any given year. And as all the models were showing us, and especially the Boston Harbor Flood Risk Model and the Massachusetts Coastal Flood Risk Model, which was built with the help of Woods Hole Group. And I don't know, oops, sorry. Sorry.
Anything we can help with, Mike?
Yeah, well, I'm gonna have to stop sharing for a second and then reshare. I apologize for the delay.
No problem.
Oh.
Asante has it up now.
Okay. All right. So keep that around the basin. Well, yeah, actually, you want to switch. I'll let her call it up.
I think this is the slide that you were last on.
All right. Well, yeah, could you go back one slide, actually? Sorry. Oh, wait, can I go back? Oh, I'm looking at the wrong screen now. All right. Slide you're looking at is the updates. Is that where you?
Yep,
Okay, could you go back one slide? Sorry.
no problem. Hardening versus raising.
Yeah, one more slide, actually. Okay. Oh, wow, that came across. All right. Well, as Julie mentioned, she showed the same graphic that was actually developed by the city of Cambridge. And the area in red you can see is the area that's protected by the Amelia Earhart Dam around the Mystic River, and then the blue area around the Charles River is what's protected by the new Charles River Dam. So, you can go to the next slide. So as we looked at the dams, there are two. In order, the dams can protect, but also from the initial flooding, but they also, even if they're overtopped and the flooding happens, they have an extremely important role in helping with any recovery. So we focused first on hardening so that the dams themselves would be able to still be operational after they were overtopped. And the reason why we did this is we knew we could move a lot quicker in getting the hardening projects out. And so and continue that role into the future while we continued to work on design for the raising, which we knew was going to take a lot longer time. And also we know that we're designing the raising for either the 1% or the 0.2% storm. there will always be a larger storm. And in the future, even if they get overtopped, we wanted those dams to always be operational so that they could help with recovery. So next slide. So in the phase 1 hardening projects, the New Charles River Dam, we looked at that one first. It was actually easier, a little bit easier to harden than the Amelia Earhart Dam. We went through the process with the Corps and put that forward. And then in the phase 2, we looked at, we were already had a Draw 7 project that was mostly a park project, and we were able to modify that project to help with the raising of the Amelia, because there's a flanking area through the Draw 7 area. So, and we did and then we're continuing with a dam raise study for the Amelia to figure out how we're going to raise the entire dam. So going next slide. So first, in that process, we started in 2016 with the vulnerability assessment to kind of target how we're going to harden the dams. And so we looked at the dams specifically. We looked at critical elevations at the dams. Now, they were both built with the same design elevations in mind in terms of their height. So they're very similar. They both have the deck level at MDC datum of 118. MDC datum is 0 NAVD equals 106. So for those that want to know what that is in NAVD, you subtract 106.4 from any of these elevations. And so we do have the dam deck level, then we had the structural limit of the concrete slabs and the pump station floors, kind of key elevations. And then we looked at those key elevations of different floods and kind of determined where we could harden to relatively easy. Next slide. So we started the New Charles River Dam. We designed the hardening project. Basically, we wanted to make sure that all the electrical systems, the hydraulic systems, all that would be operational after a flood came over the top. So we went through that project, and that was completed in 2022. The Amelia Earhart Dam project, it was a little more difficult. It's 15 years. Actually, the locks is 15 years older than the New Charles River Dam, so it was a bit harder of a project. So we're still ongoing we're in construction now. We expect to complete the hardening of the Amelia Earhart this summer. I also should say that in this process, we also looked at what would it take to replace the Amelia Earhart Dam, and that number was in the hundreds of billions, 800 billion to $1 billion to completely replace the dam. So we knew that maintaining these dams, even at their age, was a much more economical solution. All right, next slide. Another aspect of the hardening is rehabbing the Amelia Earhart Dam tower. This construction project basically has a tower that has not been operational for 20 years. And right now the controls of the locks are on the decks of the dam. So we need to rehab this tower so we can move those controls solely to the tower and off the deck, so then it can be overtopped. That project, it actually is now just out. We just awarded it and is supposed to be completed in 20 months from now. Next slide. All right, next slide. So on the phase 2 is now we're going to protect the areas of the Charles River and the Mystic River upstream. And this is to raise the dam to at least handle that 1% storm. And hopefully, as we're going through design, we'll see if we could raise it to higher. We did an initial study of the Amelia Earhart Dam and looked at 3 different elevations, the 120, 122, and 125. And the economics, there's a big jump when we're going from 122 to 125 feet in raising. So we had been focusing on 122, but now as we're going through the design of this, we're looking at going a little bit higher, as the design target now is the 500-year storm for the 2070. So Draw 7, as I mentioned before, Draw 7 it's on the west flank of the dam, and that they would be flanking well before the dam overtops. And so we took this project and then we added a flood control aspect to it, and that we're going to raise that to elevation 122, and this will allow us to stop flanking while we finish the design of the dam itself. Next slide. This is kind of a picture of the dam. You can see the area 2 is the area of draw 7. Area 1 is the main body of the dam, and then area 3 is the main body of the dam. And then area 4 is the east flank. We're also looking at a project to protect the east flank, because that also will flank before the dam overtops. We're going through design of that project, and we have to get an easement from the Gateway Mall, and right now we're trying to negotiate that easement so we can complete that and raise that to elevation 122.4. As you can see right now, the estimate of raising the dam itself, I mean, we're in the initial stages of design, so is about 30 million. Draw 7 Park is awarded at 13.375 million, and then we expect the east flank about 3 to 4 million. But compared to replacing the dam, it's a lot more economic. Right. Next slide. All right. So Draw 7 Park has been awarded. They've started construction. The east flank project design is being finalized. We're just waiting the easement, and then we've in the area of raising the dam, we're going through a detailed analysis of the dam itself. We're looking at all failure modes of the dam. We're reanalyzing what level we can go to. A lot of the challenges will be with how we modify the locks and the gates, the sector gates of the locks, and then also how we modify the face of the pump station and that. So there's a lot of work to be done. We hope to be in permitting by next year. Next slide. All right, and then on the Charles River Dam, as I mentioned before, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers built the Charles River Dam as a federal project. So we're in the first stage with them. We started a planning study with them, and that was basically to have the Corps under their analysis, look at remodel the dam from its original design scope, taking into account climate change, the increased rainfall, sea level rise, and going forward. And then from there, we will look forward to that study's scheduled to be complete this spring. We expect them to come out with a report, and it will help us then launch us into what's called a 216 study with the Corps. A 216 study is necessary when you're dealing with a federal project, and once we get that authorized on the president's plan to go forward, they will then study the dam and determine the solutions to the problem and perform the cost benefit analysis. In order for the Corps to cost share with us, they have to have a positive cost benefit analysis through their system. So we'll finish the planning study and then move into the 216. The next slide. And that's all I have for now. Thank you all. And if there are any questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Mike. So we are going to move into questions soon, but before we do that, I wanted to share a little bit about the work that the Green Ribbon Commission is doing related to coastal resilience, and what we are hoping to do in the coming months. Next slide. So it has taken us, as all of these people have mentioned, there has been a lot of planning and a lot of work has happened in Boston. And increasingly, the challenge of how are we going to pay for this work is, coming due. And so at the request of Mayor Wu, the GRC is launching a project to understand how best to finance coastal resilience measures for the Boston shoreline. Next slide. So we know that there's a huge risk to Boston. We've just seen a lot of these slides, but just to ground in that, it's billions of dollars, thousands of people, thousands of buildings, and it just increases over time. So there's a lot of urgency to moving this work forward. Next slide. So we are looking to develop a place-based opportunity study. We're calling it an opportunity study instead of a case study, because case studies are retrospective, and this is really looking forward at two neighborhoods in Boston, two areas. We're going to look at the Wharf District and North End, so some of the commercial part of downtown, and then also look at Border Street in East Boston. And between these two areas, we think that it will be about $1 billion worth of investments that are necessary. And we're going to be looking at developing a specific recommendations for a mix of private, city, state, and federal sources. And the hope for this is that it will really help us establish a broader framework for funding and financing decisions for the rest of Boston's waterfront. And the investments that we see necessary for the whole coastline are between 4 and 10 billion. So there's a lot of investment needed, and we really need to develop a strategy to move forward. Next slide. So as I said, we're going to be looking at a section of downtown and a section of East Boston. And the reason that we're looking at these two areas is that they have really pretty far along plans that are very specific, so that we can think about how do we actually pay for these interventions that have been proposed. And they're also really connected. They're both served by the Blue Line. They have really diverse demographics and really different land uses and typologies. And so between them, we hope that will give us a good sense of what will be needed along the whole Boston coast. Next slide. So we're trying to understand, what different funding sources can we draw on? What are the gaps? What examples can we use to develop new tools for climate finance governance? And how do we make sure that these investment benefits are equitably and fairly distributed? So these are big questions. And we think that by looking at these two very different neighborhoods, that will help illuminate some of them. Next slide. So we're going to build on our past work. This, includes all of the work that all of our panelists have been talking about, and the Climate Ready Boston work. Engage stakeholders. We'll have a steering committee and have additional conversations with people for targeted conversations. And then we really want to develop a financial strategy and governance recommendations with regards to fairness and equity, and understand, how can we move these things forward in a way that allows everybody to thrive in Boston. Next slide. So we expect this to be between a 12 and 15-month project overall. We're currently in the fundraising stage, but in the short term, we are looking for some background research on the different opportunities and challenges and identifying primary funding and financing tools. And then we'll go into much more detailed strategies for implementation for these specific neighborhoods and the specific proposed interventions that they have, that they are interested in moving forward. Next slide. So as I said, we're in the fundraising stage. We think this is about a $500,000 cost project, and we're still thinking $200,000. So if any of you are interested in contributing, please follow up. This will be a really helpful project for the city as a whole. So once we have secured our funding, we'll finalize and release the RFP and form the steering committee and get going. Next slide. So that's it. Great. So we are now going to turn to questions. We had a lot of questions. If everybody could come on camera, if all of our panelists can come on camera, that would be great. And let's dive in. So here's one. Well, I guess first I'd love to hear a little bit more. I know, Mike, you mentioned this, and Julie, you mentioned this too, but it would be great to hear, particularly, I think all of our attendees would be really interested in understanding more of how are you all working together, and how do these different efforts align with each other?
You want to start, Julie? Or?
Sure. So I think it was an inherent effort to work together because coastal flooding mocks municipal boundaries. And one question in the chat was, are Everett and Revere involved? And yes, so the Mystic watershed goes all the way from Revere to Charlestown Navy Yard, and all of those communities along the coastline have been involved in this. For Revere, however, so much of Revere is salt marsh based, and that's going to be really, really difficult to manage flooding in that community. And then, DCR has been an essential partner of municipalities, as the dam operator, as landowner, and just it's been we've created this very high trust ongoing working group where we're all playing to our strengths. It's very exciting.
Great.
Yeah,
Thanks,
Including
Julie. Do you want
Boston.
to add
Yeah.
anything?
I
Chris or
just
Mike?
I couldn't agree more. It's been invaluable. I mean, been able like Cambridge has helped a lot with some of the early modeling, especially in terms of the pumping at the Amelia Hart Dam, that we would have had to put out another project, had gone through another process. So we're able to leverage this work that other people are doing, and it's really allowed us to move quicker.
The only quick thing to add is just to reinforce, I think there's great coordination at three different levels. At the project level, there is a huge amount of coordination. So the work between the city of Boston and the city of Revere on the Bennington Street project is very simple. We're literally sort of leading that process together. Same thing with a project like Tinian Beach and the collaboration with DCR. The second, with a lot of credit to Julie in her former role, like at the watershed level, there's a significant amount of sort of coordination and communication that's occurring. And with credit to the governor, Secretary Tepper, and Chief Hoffer, sort of the Resilient Mass effort as a coordinating group. I think there's a lot of sort of broader coordination, and a lot of that coordination, I think, is enabled through something that both Mike and Julie referenced, which is just it's sort of a common data set of how we're looking at this, and the sort of the role of the Office of Climate Science at the state level, and the Massachusetts Coastal Flood Risk Model all give us a way of being able to look at some of the challenges that are in front of us in the same way.
Great, thank you. And I'll also take this opportunity to introduce Rob Lowell. Thank you so much for joining us, Rob. Rob is a civil engineer with DCR and offered to join for our Q&A section. So
thanks, Rebecca.
he's here
Appreciate
too.
it. Okay,
Yeah.
so I think everything's been well said, and I'm just happy to respond if there are any other questions along the lines here. Thank you.
Wonderful. Okay, so let's go in. I do have a number of questions of my own, but let's go into some of these questions from attendees. Chris, would love to hear of any updates regarding possible use of Fort Point Channel as a basin to capture about 10% of the City of Boston stormwater, given prospects for inundation citywide due to limited capacity below grade. And any insights regarding possible value capture mechanisms from development in flood zones as a mean to fund large-scale mitigation projects.
Thank you for that, Rebecca. Thank you for that, both Steve and Tom. So I will put in the chat some links for folks who are less familiar with this project, and it connects similarly with something that Brian, I think you had asked about as well. So the Boston Water and Sewer Commission has taken a look at the intersection of stormwater and coastal flooding. As Steve pointed out in his question, as Rebecca mentioned, roughly 10% of the stormwater of the city of Boston sort of drains through the Fort Point Channel. So one of the things the Boston Water and Sewer Commission has identified as a concept is essentially a storm surge barrier at the mouth of the Fort Point Channel that would help be able to handle the significant amount of storm water that flows through it during a significant precipitation event. The U.S. Army Corps is evaluating that as part of the Army Corps study. I don't have an update on that, but I do expect that by late spring, early summer, we'll be able to give an update about the Army Corps' evaluation. Of note, the Army Corps is evaluating this through the lens of their coastal storm risk management study, which has a specific set of outcomes that are consider stormwater, but there may be some additional evaluation that Water and Sewer want to do. And Steve, Tom, happy to talk more about that whenever works for you. On the second question on value capture. So I think that there are places where we are already seeing this. As folks know, in the city of Boston, since 2021, we've had the Coastal Flood Resilience Overlay District. This is a piece of our city regulation that requires significant redevelopments or significant new construction to elevate their buildings. It is great to be able to have buildings protect, but we are very interested, all of us here are very interested in thinking about the district scale protection as well. So we are seeing projects like Dorchester Bay City not only think about investment in their site, but also investment in work for DCR in collaboration with the city to help close part of the Moakley Park flood path. That is sort of one example. Another example, which is not quite value capture, I think, in the way in which, not quite value capture, but within the Flynn Marine Park, with credit to our planning department, there is a structure which would allow the city to be able to provide sort of upfront investment around some of the resilience improvements and potentially have tenants essentially reimburse the city for that cost. And so a way, sort of a relationship between the city and in that case, the tenants in that park, to be able to help invest in resilience infrastructure that not only protects those properties and those businesses, but the broader South Boston community. I do think there's opportunities to think about this more broadly. This is a little bit of what Rebecca touched on, but right now these are sort of the examples of where we are.
Can I make a point about value capture? Is it's really valuable, and it's not going to work everywhere because, for example, for lower income neighborhoods, value capture means redeveloping where people live into market race, waterfront, commercial and retail and residential neighborhoods. So the question is, where do we rely on private dollars to elevate the shoreline, and where do we require either philanthropic or public dollars for equity reasons? And so it's not a panacea. It's a really important tool, but you know that that's going to be a higher end neighborhood that gets the benefits from it. And so the question is, who are we doing coastal resilience for, and can people stay in their neighborhoods after it's resilient?
And just to build on Julie's point, which I very much agree with, we also do not want to be in a position where resilience is development dependent. That we are that the really critical sort of like investment in protecting a neighborhood can only be achieved through that particular method. So it is, I think, as a tool, one that is interesting for us to understand. As sort of the sole tool, it isn't a fit.
Great, thank you all. Can you all share a little bit about how you model and seek data that supports the investment in or the design of these projects? And what are the opportunities to partner with universities in the area to ensure resiliency surrounding Boston? Do you want to start with that one, Julie? Or go ahead, Mike.
Yeah. Can you repeat the first part of that question?
Yeah, just how do you model and use data that supports the investment for these projects?
Yeah, it is a challenge because as anyone that deals with models know that all models are wrong, just some are useful. And the data is absolutely important. Now, with the dams, we've been collecting data there every day. Every 15 minutes, we collect elevation data. We whenever we turn on the pumps, whenever we run the locks. So that data has been very helpful in kind of ground truthing any models that are of the Mystic and also the Charles River. And then there's also USGS data for the rivers. They, tracking the flow of the rivers and the rain and all the precipitation gauges out there. All those have to enter into all the models. And it's another point of the collaboration. Like we brought on the Corps, and they're relooking at the entire Charles River watershed. And the one thing they did rely on, like Cambridge has done a lot of stormwater modeling and had all that data and models encapsulated that the Corps then looked at, and then Boston on the other side, and then they put all those together, and that's what they're finalizing now. So it's you take so all that data has to come in, and then we have to model the storms through these programs like HEC-RAS and that, and then you take it back, and then you have also there were a number of storms that the Corps looked at elevations that floods got up to, and so then you take those storms and you model that rainfall through through the model you've created and see how close you get to the elevations out there. And when you're close enough, then you say this represents the storms going forward.
Maybe I would add to what Mike said, the university part is, this area is really a living lab for what you can do when you're not constrained by politics, but you are somewhat constrained by finances. But we're also a center of design excellence in Greater Boston. And so I would love to see the universities use this work to train the next generation of people working on coastal flooding, um, precipitation flooding and drought, heat. We have to think about winter weirding. The freeze-thaw cycles we're experiencing is going to be really hard on maintenance. Groundwater intrusion, maybe fires. So what I would say is projects like this kind of need longer term attention, consistent attention at a higher professional level than students may be able to participate in, but they can also be used to train the next group of people where we need even more coastal engineers, even more folks working on high performance zero net carbon technology. And I think there's a wonderful opportunity to use this area as a living lab for both experimentation and for learning. And I hope we take advantage of that.
Just to build on Julie's point and give it an example. So the Stone Living Lab, and we were joined earlier by Joe Christo, who some of you may know, but the Stone Living Lab essentially is a collaboration in many ways between UMass Boston, the Stone Foundation, Boston Harbor Now, and a series of city, state, and federal partners. The Stone Living Lab has been very focused on exactly what Julie is talking about, thinking about how do we understand and test out nature-based solutions as we invest in resilience broadly across the city, Boston Harbor, and beyond. They recently installed and I've started sort of a pair of tests of living seawalls, both in Boston at the Condor Street Urban Wild and along the South Boston waterfront. It is a good example of a university partner helping us understand how do we expand our toolkit so that as we are making, in this case, Boston more resilient, we are also continuing to contribute to the overall ecology environment of the harbor. And that sort of, as Julie referenced, so like that sort of like longer term sort of evaluation is going to help us understand how do we make a solution like that a potential part of a design standard for all of us going forward.
Great, thank you. We saw a number of questions come through the chat about federal funding and these specific projects and more generally, what if funding doesn't come through? Are there contingency plans? I know there's a lot that's up in the air, but do any of you have anything you want to say?
I'll just throw out that much of DCR's planning efforts is done with our annual capital funding and does not rely on federal funding. So our planning efforts and our work at this point is not at risk. We are also benefiting from ARPA federal funds that were part of the last distribution of funds from the feds. So that certainly enabled a number of our projects to go forward. But much of our planning and much of our design work will continue regardless of any federal opportunities right now.
Mm-hmm.
My biggest fear is that people will stop trying, like that people will slow down way beyond what needs to happen. Because for better or for worse, it was actually quite difficult to get money from the federal grants for projects that were actually this small. Because a lot of the infrastructure grants were for major projects. The one big grant we did get was for the Island End River. That is the barrier and used to be a very extensive tidal river between Chelsea and Everett. The New England Produce Center, which distributes almost all of the fruits and vegetables throughout New England and the Canadian Maritimes, sits there and is very flood prone. And the price tag for that project is over $100 million. That has increased quite a bit since COVID, mostly because of inflation of construction. But that's the big concern I have, is that is a grant that's in process. It has preliminary approval, but there's paperwork to do. And I think we will get it eventually. I think contracts matter, and I think appropriations matter, but it's not hard to slow things down. So what we do have control over is our own commitments to doing what we have been trying to do for over a decade, and to being creative and to lower the cost of working together and coming up with creative ways to plan and design and construct these solutions. But it's a gift that we've come up with this consensus around data and the need to move forward. And I just don't want us to slow down out of fear, because yeah, that's my concern.
I just have to, I totally agree with Julie. I mean, throughout my career, there's always been a fluctuation of money at DCR. And so we've always just kind of moved forward what we can move forward when we can. I mean, the ARPA recently was a great boon to DCR. It allowed us to move, several projects forward very quickly, whereas it would have taken a few more years. Luckily, administrations change every 4 years or 8 years.
Maybe only a quick thing to add. I think on similar to Rob's point, obviously there's a significant amount of both city and state investment already in this work, which is enabling a huge amount of it to be able to move forward and into planning and design. To, I think, Barbara, you might have asked about both Tinian and Fort Point. I don't have an update on either of those. The Tinian grant is specific to sort of DCR is the direct recipient of that. So Mike, Rob, if you have an update, please feel free to share that. I would also just note that, as in some ways, as Rebecca referenced, the question around sort of how we finance this over years, over decades, really is a question that has been with us for a while. And so I think it was going to require a lot of us thinking about how we do this work together at all levels. And so I think there's more to be thought through and worked on in the days ahead.
Great, thank you all. Let's see, Julie, can you please share a little bit more about the status of the Island End project?
Sure. I wish I had pulled up a slide to show that a little bit better, but so let me see if I can pull up a slide.
While you
Can
do
you
that,
ask a
do
different
others wanna...
question? Yeah, exactly.
With the rise of climate change and frequent flooding, how are you all thinking about vegetation, and whether it's native or non-native, and how do we use different vegetation that will be more adaptable in the future?
I'm happy to start and then turn it over to the experts. First, the person who asked that question actually knows way more about the answer to that question than I do. So Josh, I would just say I would ask you before I would imagine coming up with an answer myself. But I do think that sort of really is again, sort of a great example of something of like the work of groups like the Stone Living Lab, and frankly, the work of our Parks Department, that there is an opportunity for us to be thinking about what are the right design standards as we create great landscaping plans for the projects we have ahead of us, and an opportunity, I think, across everybody on this call to think about partnerships in sort of in evaluating and sharing best practices of what we should be planting, both so that the vegetation thrives and it's a beautiful, welcoming place for our residents.
All right, I do have something I can share.
Okay, great.
So the short answer is that we're quite far along. The longer answer is if you want more detail, I would encourage you to talk with Weston and Sampson and the cities of Chelsea and Everett, and I can get you the folks there. So this is looking down at the Island End River, highly industrial area. Again, this used to kind of look like a broccoli, and only the stem is left that's daylighted, and the rest of it is culverted. And the line is the city boundary. This is actually a 200-year storm in 2070, and you can see where that flooding would go. The reason it's so different is the Chelsea side is a hill, and the Everett side to the left is flat. So the project group has identified what that flood barrier is going to look like. It ties into the Chelsea side with a hill, and it's going to be a vertical cement barrier to protect the inland industries that are you can just see the New England Produce Center with all those. Those are actually truck docks for the produce distribution, and then downstream, those industries said we would actually not. We don't want to be part of the flood barrier because of our operations. My belief is that this project, which Chelsea and Everett have been working on since about 2017, my belief it's through permitting. It's certainly through permitting on the Chelsea side. I believe it's through permitting on the Everett side. And really, it's now making sure that FEMA grant goes through, and they are working on a major matching state grant from it was a September bill that was $750 million that the state appropriated for matching funds for federal bills, for federal grants. So big question about FEMA, still actively lobbying for the rest of the funding, but we're through design, and I believe it's through permitting. So very well on its way, incredibly helpful project, both for our food security and also some environmental justice neighborhoods that would also be affected by inland flooding. And if you need more than that, it's not me, but I can steer you towards the people who know more.
Great, thanks, Julie. And one final question. Are there plans for coastal risk modeling to include precipitation in addition to storm surge and sea level rise?
Cambridge's does. So the upriver modeling does include precipitation.
Oh, did you just answer this here, Chris? Sorry.
I sort of put an answer, but
yeah,
Julie, Mike, Rob, I mean, WaterSewer has done some of this. You can find that at the link that's in the comment in the chat, and WaterSewer is doing some additional modeling right now, mostly focused on stormwater. But sorry, Julie.
And I guess none at all. But the caveat is, like, when we see that Leominster got 11 inches of rain in 5 hours, it's not the same as sea level rise, where our predictions are pretty good for the next few decades. I think we're in that place of triage of, like, what are the flood prone low-lying areas that need to be storm hardened, because we just don't know when we're going to get a dump like that. That's a different experience.
And
excuse me. Go ahead, Mike. I was gonna.
Yeah, for the work at the dams, we looked both at the coastal storm alone as well as coastal storm with rainfall. As much as we get, Julie's right, the rainfall and update and changing rainfall is a lot. Right now, we don't have a good process for predicting the future rainfalls as well. So we're taking what rainfall we have, models of rainfall we have, and we're updating them as much as we can scientifically do. But it's
right.
I think that's more of a flood protection than prevention for rainfall.
Great. Well, we are at time. Thank you all so much for joining us for this webinar. And thank you to all of our attendees for your great questions and your enthusiasm. We look forward to working with all of you to try and solve these really big, challenging problems. And look forward to continuing the conversation. So thanks so much, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.